Welcome back. We're in Chapter 8, the second half of Chapter 8. When last I left, we talked about the Loyalists, and now we're going to talk about the Battle of Trenton and the Battle of Princeton. But first we have to understand what's happening. After the defeat at Bunker Hill, a large fleet appeared off New York in 1776. Okay, Boston, the British evacuated Boston and decided to conquer and use New York as their base of operations. To do this, they brought in 500 ships and 35,000 troops, the largest armed force we've seen in America until the Civil War. George Washington, with only 18,000 men, attempted to fight him there. Even though he knew it would be a bad idea, he believed that they had to try to fight. He tried to fight there at the Battle of Long Island, and it just went all against the colonists. They were routed. They were destroyed, and basically the army was trapped on Long Island. The British had controlled the sea. There was no escape. We are going to see the end of the revolution immediately. This little rebel army is going to be crushed. They cannot escape. The British control the sea. There's warships right there, and we have British troops that are surrounding them, outnumber them. They're well supplied, well armed, and the colonist troops can't stand up to the British troops at all. It's going to be over. It's going to be a complete surrender. By the narrowest of margins, thanks to a favoring wind and fog, the textbook says, or, as is more honest, by a miracle of God, Washington snuck his troops at night quietly across under the noses of the British ships in rowboats across the canal, okay, and escaped Manhattan Island, and eventually across the Hudson River to New Jersey, and eventually the Delaware River. This is one of those amazing events that it is clear God, or as Benjamin Franklin said, Providence had a hand in. Benjamin Franklin said, if a sparrow cannot fall from heaven without God knowing, do you think a nation can rise without him noticing? Well, here we see one example of God in his mercy and kindness preventing the destruction of America before it even began, and through his divine intervention allowed the escape of the American troops. Okay, and I'm not going to spend a long time on this, but I do truly mean this was a miraculous escape. There's been a couple in world history that are similar to this, one of which is the Battle of Dunkirk that we see in World War II. But such an escape similar to this is rarely seen, and this is probably the greatest military escape of divine intervention of all time. The army then marched from New York, chasing the British army, chasing Washington's army, marched toward Philadelphia. Washington tried to stop him, slow him down, etc. But eventually the British army marched from New York all the way down and captured Philadelphia, okay, which had been the American capital. So now we have Philadelphia and New York controlled by the British. General Howe wasn't a very aggressive general, but he had defeated every time. The Battle of Brandywine, the Battle of Germantown. The American troops could not stand in front of the British. However, it seemed like all was lost. Again, we see a divine thing. On Christmas Day in 1776, George Washington, with 2,400 men, his army had shrank down to 2,400 men that he could use, snuck out across the frozen Delaware River to Trenton, New Jersey, and surprised and captured 1,000 Hessians who were sleeping there. That capture provided them with supplies, arms, weapons, and the desperately needed food and clothing needed that helped them survive the Valley Forge winter. As brutal as it was, it helped them survive. Shortly after, a week later, he went and inflicted a sharp defeat on, similarly, on a British detachment at Princeton by leaving his campfires burning as a ruse. For this reputation, he got the nickname Old Fox Washington. So you're gonna that's gonna answer the questions for number 16. Number 17. What battle defeated the British in Lake Champlain? You'll notice on page 154 a map, and if you look at that map, you'll see you'll see Lake Champlain, you'll see Fort Ticonderoga, you see Saratoga, and you'll see the various things. Basically, several armies or British armies are marching to pinch the state of New York and cut off the state of New York, and etc. from Boston and the rest of the colonies. Okay, and they're coming down from Montreal. Okay, so they're trying to cut off the New England from the rest of the colonies. What happens is an American hero, and I do mean American hero here, Benedict Arnold, defeated the British on Lake Champlain. And because of that, the British could not start their march from Fort Ticonderoga. They had to start their march from Montreal. Without this victory, they probably would have been able to accomplish their mission. So if I ask who defeated the British on Lake Champlain, that was Benedict Arnold. All right. What battle was the decisive battle in American and world history? The most decisive battle here of the Revolutionary War, besides obviously Yorktown, where the British surrendered their military, was Saratoga. Saratoga was the big battle here in the north, and they defeated him at Lake Champlain. So the British had to retreat to Montreal. If you look on your map when you're following along, and the following winter, the following summer, they start again. They march down, trying to piecemeal the thing in, and they are defeated by a general. Once again, Benedict Arnold. You will note that General Burgoyne was forced to surrender his entire command at Saratoga to American General Horatio Gates. But the real hero of this battle was Benedict Arnold, who suffered an injury very shortly before. It is very important here to note that Benedict Arnold here perhaps was the hero of the greatest battle of the Revolution. All right? I just want to make note of that. You'll understand why here in a second. But the Battle of Saratoga is what gave the idea to the French and other nations that, hey, the colonists might actually win, and it's what brought them off the side and brought them foreign aid. What percentage? And I'm looking at here question number 19. What percentage of gunpowder came from the French? Before Saratoga, okay, in the first 2.5 years of the war, about 90% of the gunpowder used by the Americans came from the French arsenals. They were supplying quietly, without officially doing it, the British rebels. Okay, they were enemies of Britain. So there's British rebels, which happened to be American colonists. They supplied them, similar to how the United States during the Cold War supplied the rebels against the communists throughout the world with guns and armor and ammunition and supplies to fight against them. All right. Okay, and so they supply. France supplies 90% of all the gunpowder used by the Americans. After the defeat at Saratoga, the British offered the Americans home rule within the empire. Basically, the first time they had offered this, sort of like what Canada has today, or what Jamaica may have, or what Australia has, where you have your own home rule, but you answer to the crown. And now, it may not have been exactly that manner as like Canada has today, as being part of the British Empire, but having a good measure of freedom, since we consider them an independent country. But rather as like they may have had, like the Americas could have had their own parliament about taxation and stuff. I can't tell you the exact details of that now because it didn't happen. We just know that there was an offer, but the Americans had decided that this was all they had ever asked for, except for independence. But now they wanted independence. France very shortly after, offered the Americans a treaty of alliance. Therefore, in exchange for, rather than the United States could have taken either the British treaty or the offer of peace or a French treaty. They chose independence, but knowing they're getting this treaty with France. And their treaty promised everything that Great Britain was offering, plus independence. Both allies bound themselves to wage war until the United States had won its freedom, until both agreed to terms with the common foe. Okay? From 1778 to 1783, how much aid was given from France to the United States? France provided the rebels, which is the colonists here, with guns, money, equipment, and about 1/2 of all America's regular armed forces and practically all of the nation's new navy. In other words, half of the army from 1778 to 1783, and all of the navy and a great deal of the weaponry all came from France. France bankrolled, and not bankrolled, but majorly supported the war through their money and resources, half of the military and all of the navy. Without France, the United States would not have existed. France, thus, and England went to war in 1778, but so did then Spain enter the war against Britain in 1779, as did Holland. So now you have Spanish and French fleets outnumbering the British fleets, and other nations adopted a policy of armed neutrality, which is basically, we're not going to declare war on you, but we're very angry at you. Okay? They lined them up in an idea of passive hostility toward Britain. So basically, what you ended up with was Great Britain was lined up against all of Europe. And the result of this was because Britain had been so powerful and domineering over the rest of Europe and the rest of the world due to their power and their naval ability. We find here that someone gave up on the war at the wrong time. Someone picked the wrong side at the wrong time. And why? Because he wasn't getting enough honor and celebration. He actually believed that he ought to be put in charge of the army. And you see very quickly why he wasn't. Because he was very ambitious, scheming. And that was Benedict Arnold. He became a traitor. And number 22 is what brilliant general turned traitor? The answer is Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold sold out for a leader, to become a leader in the British military, and join the British military in exchange for a lot of money and a high-ranking position, because he wasn't promoted, and it was more about personal pride for him than about the cause. That is not the case with Washington, which is what makes Washington such a great general. Interestingly enough, Benedict Arnold clearly was a better military general at that point than Washington had been, but he wasn't the moral leader that Washington was. All right. In the South, what two battles were vital in the South for American victory? The two battles, Kings Mountain and then Cowpens. In Kings Mountain, you have a lot of the roughnecks and the rednecks and the wild men and the mountaineers come out and defeat a group of brutal British soldiers. British soldiers who were known for extreme brutality. And they came out and defeated them. And these were people out of the wildlands who had not yet fought in the war per se, but these were savage Indian fighting rednecks. And I do mean that literally in the sense of that when we think of rednecks out of the hills and stuff, hillbillies, these were people. That's why it's called Kings Mountain. This is in the Western Carolinas and Kentucky area where these people came out. Then there was the Battle of Cowpens, and I'm going to tell you the story of the Battle of Cowpens here. And what happened? We have here the British Army. It's a lot stronger than the American Army. And what we had found was the Americans struggled to fight in a pitched battle. And Cowpens was a real victory, a special victory, because what happened was that the Americans lined up 3 lines of troops. All right, you're not going to find this in your textbook, so and this is not a question on your thing, but it's pretty interesting. The Americans lined up 3 lines of troops. Now, the guns were not repeater rifles. And you fired once, and it would take you 30 seconds to a minute to reload. Now the British could do it 2 to 3 times as fast as the American troops. Thus, they could fire a lot faster and inflict a lot more devastating losses. And also, they didn't break ranks and run every time when they were shot at, which is what the Americans did. At Cowpens, they formed 3 lines of troops. The first line laid down, the second line knelt, and the third line stood. As the British advanced, when the order was given, the first line, those laying down, fired. After they fired, okay, the second group then could fire, and then the third group could fire. And if needed, the first group could then retreat through the ranks to the back, and the second group would then be in front. They would fire. They could then retreat through the ranks to the back, and then the third group could retreat through the ranks to the back. But they did all this in what they called Cowpens, is in a big pasture that had a stream behind them, so they could not retreat and run away. The Americans were faced. They had to fight or try to die swimming across the stream and getting shot at. When I say stream, I do mean more of a river. So the general forced himself. The general forced the American troops to do this, but allowed through his tactics of the 3 lines instead of a 1 big line, 3 smaller lines, a skirmish line. You fire, you retreat. That little cycling thing allowed them to defeat the British there. So a tremendous tactical victory. It's one of the great tactical victories of the American Revolution. There's some various victories, and there's military and there's economic victories, but actually an actual battlefield tactical, brilliant strategic victory is perhaps one of the greatest tactical strategic victories. General Nathan Greene then took over. He was a Quaker-reared tactician. He was a Quaker, but he distinguished himself by a strategy of delay, standing, and retreating. So the general chased him. He would shoot, retreat, fight. When I say shoot, I mean they would fight, and then they would retreat, fight, and retreat. And basically, the British became exhausted as their supply line got further and further and further into unfriendly territory. And General Cornwallis finally succeeded, by doing this, the fighting Quaker, General Nathan Greene, succeeded in clearing most of Georgia and South Carolina of British troops. During the war, how many ships? Let's turn to number 24. How many ships did the American privateers capture? And that is around some 600 British prizes. Okay. Now they may have lost around 1,000 ships themselves, the Americans, and we'll talk about that a little later. But I'll just mention that all 1,000 of those ships were owned by Robert Morris, personally. Yorktown. So General Cornwallis has marched chasing General Nathaniel Greene up from Charleston, Virginia, up into Virginia, and finally he decides to winter and stay and pause for reinforcements at Yorktown, which was a tremendous spot, an excellent strategic spot for the British Navy to come in and supply them, and they could not be surrounded and attacked. It was, they would have the Navy. They had the Navy right there, so they could go, load and unload their ships. It's a great military, spot that's in camp for a period of time while you're getting reinforcements until you decide what to do. There was one problem with this. He assumed that Britain would continue to control the sea, because why would they not? They did. They controlled it. They had most power. They always would. They assumed. But what happened was, Admiral de Grasse, the French fleet snuck away in the West Indies, snuck up and hemmed in the British troops there in Yorktown. At the same time, George Washington, with several thousand French troops, marched all the way down from the New York area very rapidly, accompanied by Rochambeau's French army, joining up with General Greene's troops that were there, and pinned in then General Cornwallis at Yorktown. Now they could get no food or supplies. They had cannon. They could start bombarding. They outnumbered the British there. They had better position. They can start bombarding them, and they put them into siege. So it became a siege of Yorktown. Eventually, Admiral de Grasse beat a British fleet in a naval battle, or stopped them from being able to get in. The British Navy from getting in to reinforce them. General Cornwallis was forced to surrender. He surrendered while his band played appropriately. The world turned upside down. So why did Cornwallis march to Chesapeake Bay? Because the British Navy would have been able to resupply him and support him there. That's why he did it. It was an excellent place to be resupplied. How much did the French provide at the Battle of Yorktown? The French provided all the sea power and about half of the regular troops of 16,000 men. At the end of this, this was not actually the end of the war, but it was the last major military fighting. You had some vicious patriot versus loyalist warfare in the South. You didn't have a major battle. Washington had a tremendous accomplishment, was to keep the army alive during this time, and rather than allowing them to just dissipate, which if they had done so, a peace treaty might never have been signed. Who was a vital member of the American peace negotiations? This is an individual that has not gotten the credit he has deserved in American history, but John Jay. John Jay of New York is someone's name who's going to crop up over and over and over and over as someone who is highly thought of and a leader in our country's history. John Jay, John Adams, and Ben Franklin went to sign a peace treaty with England. Okay? But the three envoys had explicit instructions from Congress to make no separate peace and to consult with their French allies at all stages of the negotiations. But these envoys were deeply suspicious of the old world intrigue. Okay, they knew how things worked over there. They knew that in the old world, intrigue and diplomatic treaties, etc., were very, very complicated and conspiratorial things. And they also knew that the representatives, they also knew that the Congress had written them with a French Foreign Office, knowing that these were the instructions. So they, while there, the French were hoping to keep the United States weak, but fighting against the British. They wanted to keep America weak and east of the Allegheny Mountains. A weak America, like a horse sturdy enough to plow but not vicious enough to kick, is how the book says. It would be easier to manage for the French. Okay? France was paying a heavy price in treasure to get America's independence and wanted to get its money's worth. John Jay was suspicious. He perceived that the French could not satisfy the ambitions of both the Americans and the Spaniards. He saw signs, or maybe he just thought he did, but more than likely, probably he saw signs, that the French negotiators would betray American interests. He therefore made secret overtures to London against his instructions from Congress and came to a peace treaty. The Peace Treaty of Paris in 1783, the British officially recognized the United States. In addition, they granted generous boundaries stretching from the Mississippi all the way to the east. From the Atlantic to the Mississippi to basically the Great Lakes on the north and to Spanish Florida on the south. Okay, the Yankees, now they're divorced from the Empire, had a massive amount. They also could have a share in the fisheries of Newfoundland, which is what was extremely valuable. This was tremendous terms. It was an unbelievable settlement. And the reason the British came to this is they were tired of war. Britain was trying to seduce America from its French alliance because they were far more worried about the French than they were about the Americans, and they wanted to get rid of the French. They were more friendly to the Americans than they were, and it wanted to end this war. While the French Foreign Office formally approved it, they weren't exactly happy with it, but they were relieved at the prospect of ending war and of their promises to the Spanish crown. And the last question we have here, number 28, that's We have Robert Morris' question after that. Who alone gained from the world war? It's world girdling war, this wide war around the world. America alone gained. France didn't gain, England didn't gain, Spain didn't gain, but America did. All right. That is the end of Chapter 8. I'm now going to do a lecture, and you're going to have another lecture here in a second. It's on Chapter 8, but it's on Robert Morris, and this is very interesting. You're not going to find this in the textbook, but he's an individual you should know about. Thank you for joining me today.